You know, I've always said that government has three roles. They can lead, follow, or get the hell out of the way.
I never thought I would live the day to see some political leaders suggest that the state, the government, should be running grocery stores.
And as a trading nation, Canada has a fundamental interest in global stability because it's very hard to sell things to people who are at war with one another. And so Canada has an ability to leverage the abundance of natural wealth that it has to that effect.
We don't think about this as being central to our farms. This is the marketing freedom of the next 30 years and how we own and commercialize our data.
Canada produces food on a global scale, but thinks about it as a commodity, not as a weapon, not as an asset, not as a system under threat. Welcome to the Trent Klarenbach Podcast. I'm your host, Trent Klarenbach. Today we are diagnosing a strategic failure problem, the weaponization of food. Joining me to determine how exposed we are is a formidable panel. First, Professor Trent Klarenbach. He is an award-winning professor at the Royal Military College of Canada. An author, his latest book, published in 2025, covers military operations in response to domestic emergencies and global pandemics. Next is Dr. Sylvain Charlebois, widely known as the food professor. He is a visiting professor in food policy and distribution at McGill University and the senior director of the agri-food analytics lab at Dalhousie University. In 2025, he received the prestigious Charles III Medal in recognition of his tremendous work informing Canadians about food issues. Also along with us is the Honorable Gerry Ritz, driven by a lifelong passion for agriculture and a farmer's first mentality. He served for over 8 years as Canada's Agriculture Minister. Under his leadership, the Marketing Freedom for Grain Farmers Act was passed in 2012, which removed the mandatory requirement to market wheat and barley through the Canadian Wheat Board. Finally, Jason Dearborn. He is the chairman and CEO of GRNX Global, where he is advancing agricultural technology and blockchain solutions. Former legislature representing Kinnersley, Saskatchewan. He is also a fifth-generation owner-operator of Breck Neck Farm. Gentlemen, welcome to the show.
Hello.
Yeah, hello.
Yeah, great to have you guys on here. This is going to be great. Christian, I want to start with you and focus on food as a strategic asset. We look at global supply chains through an economic lens, but the military lens, it's quite different. Is food now a weapon in geopolitical conflict?
So look, I think food has always been a weapon in conflict, but we live in a different type of world where, of course, we have significant disruptions at the individual, at the state, and at the global level, right? We have disruptions in the ability of the resilience of individuals around the world. Prices in Africa as a result of sort of increased fertilizer and the inability to supply people with energy security that they require to plant their fields. Think of the state disruptions to global navigation flows through choke points, in particular Strait of Hormuz. And think, of course, of global disruptions in our biospheres changing and how inherently climate change and so compounding effects that make this very different. And we have this in a situation where we have 7.5 billion people in the world today. We're going to have another 2 billion or so over the next 20, 25 years. And so inherently is more indispensable than ever to security, prosperity, and the democratic and value-based life that we all cherish. And Canada has not very systematic or strategic about realizing the asset that it has. if you look at Norway, for instance, and they talk about their oil and gas, they don't talk about export hydrocarbons. They talk about that Norway exports reliability, stability, prosperity, and Canada offers all of in droves. Think about our hydrocarbons, think about our critical minerals, but nobody thinks about agriculture and agri-food, our third largest export industry, and as the ability to leverage that for, on the one hand, supplies, stability, and deterrence for allies and partners in the Indo-Pacific and in Europe. One of the way we dissuade adversaries to try to engage in conflict is by making sure that they know that countries such as Canada will continue to supply our allies and have the ability to defend those supply routes, and to think about food and food supplies in the same way we think about energy security or the way we think about critical mineral security. Because when people go hungry, it's going to be very difficult to sustain, for instance, a contest, a conflict, and it's going to cause significant political instability. And as a trading nation that has a fundamental interest in global stability, because it's very hard to sell things to people who are at war with one another. And so Canada has an ability to leverage the abundance of natural wealth that it has to that effect. But one of the big curiosities is it is one of the 5 global food producers and exporters, and it doesn't seem to be thinking about that as a strategic asset to shape the world in which we live and the world in which we want to live.
Yeah, that's interesting. Let's look at a specific vulnerability, which is Canada's lack of hard security doctrine around agriculture. Does Canada have the capacity or even the authority to prioritize domestic food security in a global conflict, or are we bound by our allies or allegiances with other nations?
Well, it first requires us to understand food as what effect do we want to achieve with the immense agricultural capacities that we want to have in this country. And hence sort of my point about what we want to achieve is stability, reliability, prosperity, and that we can leverage to that effect. It means we need to understand what ways we have available to do that. And so that includes making sure what food stores, for instance, we want to ensure we generate in this country to be able to leverage those stores in the event of instability in the world. It requires us thinking strategically about the ways that we need to have in place, for instance, in terms of fertilizer and in terms of chemicals. We're also have much foresight in this country when it comes to disruptions. It seems like the COVID-19 pandemic has taught us much about supply disruptions and how we need to play ahead. And that means aligning that with means, say resources, to inform those ways, to finance those ways, to achieve the effects that we're ultimately looking for. And those resources, one of the challenges we have in Canada is we lack the significant amounts of capital. So hence the opportunity to work with allies and to work with partners to create the infrastructure that we need in this country to generate better returns on the agricultural capabilities that we have, to be able to work ahead and generate stock in case of disruptions, but also to invest for our partners in the ability to secure what the military calls lines of communication. So that is to say, merchant marine, and to be able to safeguard those maritime passages. For instance, currently a debate Canada purchasing submarines, absolutely integral if we're going to safeguard navigation passages to the Indo-Pacific, to allies and partners, and or to Europe in the event of conflict. So it seems that there's an opportunity for us to be much more strategic and systematic in our than we have been.
Gerry, I want to bring you in here. If we look at a scenario involving state-directed diversion of grain flows, is that legal or is that just inevitable in a crisis? Furthermore, what happens with Canada's exports in a NATO-aligned supply crisis?
Oh, I don't think the government of the day has even got answers for those. At the end of the day, government can take whatever they want. They don't have the means to expropriate like land for other than for security reasons, but they can certainly redirect crops and produce if they call it a security crisis. I'm not sure what exactly would trigger that. We used to have that under the wheat board. We sent grain to Great Britain during World War II, never did get paid for it, that I understand. And governments wrote it off. And of course, that debt came right back to the foreign gate. We were years clawing back from that one. So with the changes to the wheat board, which were long overdue, we're not seeing the ability for governments to grab that out of Western Canada like they did at that time. We were very much a colony in their eyes. At the end of the day, food security is really what Canada is all about. We have the ability to overproduce large land masses, low population bases, which is growing exponentially. And some people would argue that's not going in the right direction. But having said that, all the trade trips that I did to countries like China and India that don't have the ability to feed their own people and have to import and build up food stores. Our food stores are right there on the farm in the grain bins out in the corrals. But I always made the line, and it went over very well, that Canada produces its food on clean land with clean water and clean air. They can't claim that. They cannot do that. And that is a huge benefit that we have. We're an exporting nation. We export half of what we produce, and yet we import half of what we consume because we only eat certain parts of the pig. We only eat certain vegetables and so on like that as compared to other entities. So we're very selective in what we eat. I'm seeing a lot more pressure with the latest immigration rises on halal and kosher and so on like that. I just saw a thing this morning that Wendy's is going halal with all their chicken. And I guess you can't offer two streams in a restaurant. You got to pick one or the other. That tells you who their customers are. Probably won't be me anytime soon. But, having said that, it's just the way that the animal is slaughtered that makes that difference. To me, it's inhumane the way they do it. But at the end of the day, Canada will always be a major agricultural producer. Farmers face three things, basically, that they don't control. Of course, the weather, the cost of their inputs, and government taxes and regulations. And government taxes and regulations are the big unknown. We do see weather cycles. We do know what our cost of inputs is going to do and what we're going to use. And we have the choice of whether we're going to use them or not. But you look at the regulations that government put in when it comes to infrastructure for our exports. They can disincentivize what we do and how we do it and when we can do it. That's the next big fight, in my estimation, is freeing up that marketing ability for producers to sell what they want, where they want, when they want, to who they want. And when you cannot connect the dots and get it to port and offshore, you're going to lose every time. You're going to continue to be a price taker. So there's a ton of work to be done. I've always said that government has three roles. They can lead, follow, or get the hell out of the way. And we're seeing this latest government being very much intrusive into lines of supply, intrusive into what is grown, where it's grown, how it's handled, what's done with it, and so on. And they don't understand it. They're going along with what media interventionists put out there. They're going along with what consumers think they want or say they want. They don't understand how farming is done and why it's done in that way. You look at all the methane that cattle produce, they claim is a net loss. It's not. That's actually part of the cycle that puts green back into those pastures. So they just don't understand what it is that they're being asked to critique. And at the end of the day, the only thing they want is a cheaper price at the grocery store. And you cannot have that when you've got interventionists, levels of government and media and so on driving costs up.
That's a good segue into Sylvain's conversation here. Sylvain, let's pivot from global doctrine to our own backyards and talk about retail fragility and civil stability. There's a massive urban dependency versus rural production asymmetry in this country. How thin are Canada's retail food margins and inventories, really?
They're thinner than what most people think. I can tell you that. We do have some very strong grocers in our country. Loblaws, obviously, Sobeys, and Empire, and Metro. All three of them, I would say, are well-organized companies. They've all been on my podcast, and I have a tremendous respect, and they're investing quite heavily in the middle mile in the last few years. So that DC to store space, all of them have understood that if you invest in the middle mile, you become more efficient as a grocer, and so we've all benefited from that. But margins are still quite thin, and unfortunately, it's been extremely difficult to explain that to the Canadian public because, to Gerry's point, um, the narrative is very controlled by the media, and frankly, it's been quite frustrating to work with. I've been working with the media for 25 years, and it's been extremely difficult over the last 4 or 5 years to really inform the public properly with data, actual data. Perceptions appear to be really framing policy, really, and that's really a dangerous place to be. And so when you try to explain to people how supply chains actually work, they immediately go to a place they know, which is the retail store, the grocery store, but they don't necessarily understand the rest of the architecture, the rest of the entire food chain, from farm gate to store, and that's really missing right now. If we want better policy, you have to really get the public to understand the realities of the entire supply chain. Christian made some really important points, I think, understanding how strategic we can become. But in order to do that, you really need an informed public so they can actually influence policy through the elected officials.
When the system fractures, or if the system fractures, what breaks first? Price stability, availability, or consumer trust? In this battle we have with inflation versus scarcity, which triggers unrest faster? Ultimately, how many days of disruption before Canadian grocery shelves become a political crisis?
Well, I mean, we went through this during COVID. I mean, I was getting, I think, 20 phone calls a day from media asking me whether or not Canada was running out of food, without really appreciating that we just shut down a $100 billion sector, which was the hospitality and food service sector. I mean, overnight you saw that that business shifting over to retail. Obviously, you'll see some problems, but I have a lot of faith, and I'm sure all of you have faith in the food industry. And we often undermine the resiliency of the food industry. It's a very resilient food system that we have. We don't necessarily appreciate it, but we do have a resilient food industry. What we don't have is strategic foresight. And as an academic, and I'm sure Christian would appreciate that, is that we really haven't been able to provide the proper data to the public, to entrepreneurs, to farmers. We're always late in the game. I teach at Texas A&M and Purdue, and I'm jealous of the data that they have access to, so they can inform policymakers, inform farmers, inform everyone across the supply chain, and most importantly, inform the entrepreneurs wanting into the food industry. We have a entrepreneurial drought right now, so it's hard to build any case to anyone if you just don't have any data or fresh data, really, in terms of what's happening. Because the difference between now and 5-10 years ago is that things are incredibly volatile, and you need to understand what's going on today, not yesterday, the day before. 10, 15, 20 years ago, you were able to get away with it, but not anymore. The data deficit that we have in Canada is incredibly cruel to everyone across the supply chain, from farmers to consumers.
Gerry, this ties directly into policy legacy and structural weakness. You ushered in a post-Canadian Wheat Board world, focusing on efficiency versus resilience. Did deregulation increase exposure to foreign leverage, or are we maintaining our solvency with our food production?
Well, we were maintaining our sovereignty. Now we're seeing all kinds of investment coming from offshore that will start to redirect what we do and how we do it and when we do it. At the end of the day, the changes to the wheat board opened up a whole new era to, on the ground farmers. It also had a huge impact on the livestock sector, where they could buy directly from a producer their feed, barley, and so on. They didn't have to buy it through the wheat board, pay to freight and elevation to Tidewater, and then finally get it with that higher cost. So, it did open things up. Of course, anytime you open things up, you put yourself at risk from outside forces. But at the end of the day, the provinces control who can own land in their province. Some are very restrictive. Some have started to loosen those reins. But you can't stop who you borrow money from to buy that land. And if it comes to foreclosure, where does that all end up? At the end of the day, farmers rely on credit lines in order to get that crop in the ground or that livestock out to pasture and there for the summer. And a lot of those lines of credit are picked up by foreign entities now because our own groups have failed. I've seen a complete overregulation from groups like Farm Credit Canada that now insist on intensive environmental farm plans, and they will refuse to lend you the money if your farm plan doesn't measure up to what Stephen Guilbeault outlined. He's now long gone, but his legacy will remain, and his, what he did will remain in place. So, there's so many things that the producers themselves do not control that is starting to cause conflict and create unnecessary burden on the actual production of food. And it all adds to the cost. There's a lot of talk about the carbon tax. And it's not just the tax you see at the till when you check out, it's the 20 some different levels that were charged that same tax on the way to that till. So everybody's, the comment was made about data, and data is worth money, and not enough of it is in the right hands. We're seeing, with AI and Chat GTP and all these great groups, you can get an answer to anything, but is it the answer that is going to form the basis going forward? It's based on Sylvain's talking about data that's formulated from the past is helpful because it gives you a benchmark, but it's not good to promote the data of the future. And AI is not doing that. It is today's answer, not tomorrow's answer. So, there's a lot of faith put into what can happen with AI. We're seeing these things built all over the country. But at the end of the day, it still comes down to how that data is applied at the farm gate.
Yeah, good points. Interesting. What is the role of government in crisis allocation? Do we revert to a centralized control? Do we weigh export commitments versus domestic obligation? If push comes to shove, does Canada renationalize grain flows?
Oh, that'd be a big mistake.
Is this a joke or truth or dare
really.
question?
You really want me mad? Canada produces enough that we can do it all. We can walk and chew gum. We can supply domestically, and we can still export. We're one of the few entities. Well, oil and gas can do the same thing, but they've been under the thumb as well. I don't understand, and certainly there will be some policy directions that say, oh, we're going to save ourselves by not exporting anymore. That's absolutely wrong. Our biggest weak point right now is processing. In our hog sector, we send the vast majority of it stateside, and then we buy 50% of it back because we only eat the hams and the ribs and the bacon and so on. We let everything else, including the squeal, go somewhere else. And that's the nature of a good trading operation, is making sure you've got points of purchase for all aspects of that animal or that grain or that pork or chicken or whatever. And we do export a little bit of chicken, not nearly enough. Sylvain will get into that later, I'm sure. But at the end of the day, we have the capacity to do both. But government loves a good regulation, and they love to stick their finger in the air and say, look, we have the answers. They don't. They're reactionary. They're not proactive at all. And that's part of the problem with government regulations is they come in after the fact, the pendulum goes too far to the other side, and then we've got a real mess.
Can I add to that, Trent? I mean, the beef situation is classic right now. We have Ottawa negotiating with the Mercosur countries like Bolivia, Uruguay, Brazil, and Argentina, trying to get cheaper beef into our country without even thinking about how to make our beef industry more competitive. Meanwhile, a few months ago, we saw Health Canada or the CFIA actually backtrack on new traceability standards that would have actually increased the cost of production in Canada. I mean, you're shooting yourself in the foot while allowing more products into our market without thinking about, making one sector stronger. It's just really beyond me how Ottawa can be so short-sighted at times. It's quite frustrating.
Well, and that all that product from Mercosur does not face the same environmental and labor
Exactly.
standards that we force on our people. So that
Yep.
increases our costs when we bring it in. We got
Veterinary
Chinese
practices,
EVs.
environmental practices, absolutely.
Absolutely.
Trent, there's a great point made here by Gerry and Sylvain, and that has to do with how are we going to commercialize this data and who's going to own it? And I have a lot more faith in our provincial governments, which is Section 92 of the Constitution, saying that property belongs to us and data is property. And we now, for the first time in history, with AI coming, with AI agents being able to automate our trade with blockchains and transparencies and decentralized clearance systems, we have the ability to be able to be capturing this. And it is at a great risk. Marketing Freedom 2.0 is about data freedom. And, in Saskatchewan right now, we've got a large construction of a data center, and people are, I believe, largely misunderstanding some of these entities. If we do not have the geofenced capability to be processing our data, we'll never be able to make the laws around it. We need these to be provincial laws. We need them to be provincially controlled, and we need to have our regulations around data, determined in Edmonton, determined in Regina for our producers, because there is no trust with the Canadian government doing this for us.
It comes down to the role of the state in society, right? And I think a couple of things that come up are ideology versus pragmatism, right? There's no lot of people who want the world a better place and to come up with all sorts of rules without really understanding what actually works. And I always think, government needs to start with what works for people, what works for communities and what works for society. And for too long, we've erred the wrong side of the pendulum in the way we drive the role of the state. The other is that, as you point out, like value added, this isn't just an agricultural sector problem, right? We have the same problem when it comes to the oil industry, same problem when it comes to critical minerals. We're drawers of water and hewers of wood. And if we want to pivot this country in terms of its productivity, in terms of prosperity, it means thinking much more strategically about what interior processing industries we can add. And that requires some strategic underwriting by government. And it also requires, of course, underwriting in terms of the infrastructure. I'm always sort of puzzled that government is very happy to intervene in the free market that'll work just fine because there's no market failure remedy per se. But then we don't build the infrastructure in this huge country because the problem, much of the circumstances is that where you're producing it is likely not where you're going to be able to process it sufficiently, and is not going to be where you're going to be exporting it. And so that's where government needs to step in and make sure we have those capabilities. And as Jason points out, artificial intelligence is a piece of critical infrastructure. It is the field that is rapidly disrupting this world. If we don't think about data centers and the ability to control and to process our data and the way it forms every industry that we have in this country, that we are going to lose control over sovereign political and economic decision-making, including when it comes to our agricultural and agri-food industry.
If I could just make one more point about policy, Trent, there's a huge misnomer that it's MPs, that it's politicians that bring forward these grandiose ideas. It's not. It's bureaucrats, because they want more bureaucracy. They want bigger budgets. They come forward with these. And I remember at least once a month or every 2 months getting a package from my ADMs and the DM, and I would throw it back across the table and say, not a chance. Like, we're not doing this. I mean, most of it was intrusive. It was not inclusive. And it sought to make more government overreach than was required. So we always designed a program and then put the money to it, as opposed to these grandiose announcements of money, and then you try to figure out how you're going to spend it. And it always comes down to the bureaucrats to make a sausage. Nobody wants to know what's in the sausage. They just like sausage. But at the end of the day, what goes into that sausage is very important. And who's putting in what parts is really important when it comes to the best interests of the frontline producers themselves.
It got worse, Gerry. I mean, to be honest, right now we're in a phase during which most Canadians think that governments have the best solution. I never thought I would live the day to see some political leaders suggest that the state, the government, should be running grocery stores.
Yeah.
I mean,
Think of the weed
is
stores. How'd that work out?
I mean, I remember 15 years ago when I was in Saskatchewan, and we were, blue skying all sorts of ideas to make our food system more resilient. And one student, a PhD student, actually mentioned maybe we should socialize food distribution through the ownership of grocery stores by the state. And everyone laughed. 15 years later, here we are. I mean, Toronto just adopted a motion to do exactly just that for 4 stores.
Look, I mean, I grew up in the 1970s and 80s in Germany, in West Germany, so the Federal Republic of Germany. But anybody who grew up in the East will tell you what happens when the state controls your industry and your food supplies. There's going to be nothing in your stores for you to buy. Yep. We've tried this experiment, and we know that this experiment, in terms of state control supplies and state.
But Christian, this time it's going to work, though. That's what they say.
Well, like I said, check out the weed stores. How'd that work out?
I think, so for me, this comes back to this problem of risk society, right? We live for the last 4 decades or so, we've lived in an environment where citizens have come to expect the state to mitigate every possible risk for them. Their health risks, their unemployment risks, their risks when it comes to road safety. But what we haven't really thought about is what is the best way for the state to mitigate that risk. And for the state to run things, a free and democratic society is usually not the right answer. The role of the state is to mitigate market failures, or to be able to generate investments, to be able to help us do better, such as, for instance, in infrastructure, or hard questions about why we're not getting entrepreneurs into the agricultural sector. Well, perhaps because we've overregulated, and because it's impossible to attract the sort of capital that you would actually need as an entrepreneur to succeed. And so to then assume that the default solution necessarily more government, I find rather amusing.
Just stop making sense, Christian. It hurts. It hurts right here.
Yeah. Unfortunately, the right people aren't listening.
That's true.
And the bureaucrats, I often said, government's like an onion. You just peel back the layers and all it does is make you cry. That's bureaucracy. It's layer after layer that isolates the MP or the prime minister or the ministers from the actual problem. And there's no proactivity in government. Christian's alluding to that. It's all reactive. It's riding in on that big white horse and saving the day for consumers, and using the media to do it. And none of it makes any sense.
Yep.
And that information environment that we live in, where ministers and cabinet and governments are driven by constantly having to announce things because they want to be seen as doing things. And when things are going, cost of living crises and the like, then government wants to be seen as, well, we're solving things. The impetus is inherently ever more government, because we always want to announce something that government is doing to make lives better for people, rather than understand what are the underlying structural challenges that we've created, for instance, in terms of the costs that are driving up food prices, as Sylvain and Gerry pointed out, sort of unnecessarily, in the sense that, we got to balance the governments that want to bring down the cost of living, at the same time are imposing the regulations that are actually driving up the cost of your food.
Yeah. Politics over pragmatism. Yeah.
Pretty much. Yeah. Idealism is driving a lot of the policy right now, and
Yeah.
I think the current regime has figured out that if you actually attack the black box, i.e., the part of the food industry that nobody sees really, and increase the cost of production while looking good in front of cameras because you're doing something. It's hard to politicize an issue. I mean, I've been looking at EPR, the extended producer responsibility policy to that increases packaging costs, the carbon tax that Gerry actually mentioned. We did some work there. All these black box issues are incredibly difficult to politicize, and Canadians don't understand them. And so, on the one side, you have researchers like us trying to figure things out how these bad decisions or decisions are actually making things worse for our companies. In the meantime, you have consumers that are very confused and they're listening to, well, the CBC, CTV, Global, and they all have the same narrative, supporting the same narrative because, as you know, right now, legacy media is supported by subsidies given by Ottawa. It's a partisan issue. So obviously, a lot of the things that are being conveyed to the public is incredibly biased right now. It's more difficult than ever to rationalize the Canadian public in terms of what is wrong with our system. And that's really unfortunate. The only people who actually understand all this are the people in the system, but they're compromised. They can't go out and say, this is a problem. We academics are the only ones that can do that. And Christian will appreciate that. Well, we have the social license to come out and say there are problems in our food system, but there are very few of us who are game to do it because it always comes back, and we have scars to show for because we are critical of some of the things, and most of our colleagues in academia are in favor of what is happening, unfortunately.
We're not very good at lining up overall ecosystem, right? I think, like in terms of how do we line up academia with sort of broader financial and economic interests, with political interests, then with our economic productivity and our companies. So look at, for instance, how many agricultural economists, for instance, do we have in this country relative to the amounts of money that we put into research, all sorts of things that are sort of nice to have, but are ultimately sort of discretionary, where I would say, like, this is, as a third industry in Canada, this is absolutely existential, and how many people actually work on these types of related issues. And then we have decision makers that, as all of you know all too well, by and large, don't come with a particular background or expertise on anything that pertains to farm or to food. When you have a disproportionate amount of decision makers in Canada and elsewhere coming largely from other public sector areas and largely from areas of the country that don't necessarily are heavily invested in the food industry, then we're probably not going to get an optimized decision-making process. So there's also a sense of representation. How do we make sure that the right people get the right voice at the right time? And it seems to me that as the challenge, the shift towards executive decision-making in government, detriment of the parliamentary process, to the detriment of parliamentary committees, has resulted in decisions that might be expeditious for the government of the day, but are not necessarily expeditious in terms of optimizing for the outcomes in terms of the prosperity of communities and industries across the country.
Two government programs implemented years ago that still haunt food production and food sales in this country, both like imports and exports both. One is official bilingualism, forcing that labeling on all products coming in and products going out, and the metric system causes a different size of packaging, and we've got people that we want to import products from that won't ship into Canada because they don't have that right package size. So those are maybe unintended consequences, but they're very real in controlling what we have available to us and to who we can ship product to.
Trent, one of the things that we have to do in the agricultural industry is take possession of, first of all, the technological elements available to us now. I was in front of the Senate Committee on Banking and Finance on blockchains in December of 2014. We are now in 2026, and the regulations are just starting to emerge positively. A lot of this is coming from the Trump administration to the south, and it is catching up. And one of the things, there are going to be tools, they're in design now, where farmers are going to be in control of the voting nodes on chains for how their data is used. And their data, most farmers are going to think, I don't know exactly what that terminology is meaning. It means everything that's happening on your farm. It means the commercialization of your price points. It means the commercialization of all of your different stats with regards to your quality, your moisture, your color, and being able to link that right back to the end buyer, your customer. And for the first time in history, that technology is available on your phone to be linked with it. And so what we do know about government in an absolute sense, it is reactionary, and it's very, very slow to react. And it's insane in the way that it reacts. Is a basic problem of organizational behavior. The people working in government, they don't care about the issue. They care about their paycheck and looking out the window and going to lunch, right? And I think as producers, whether it's in animal husbandry or dryland crop production, we have to be first and foremost, again, out in front of these pieces in the spots where we have the most influence, which without doubt in Western Canada is in our provincial legislatures and taking control of this. If we don't, Ottawa will do it for us, and it will not be in our favor. And in the structure that we're in today, if we look at the history of the Canadian Wheat Board, which was, the monopoly didn't come into place until February of 1942. We're already at war.
No.
Oh, did we lose him?
Lost Jason. Well, I can probably fill in a little bit what he's talking about for the listeners there. The Wheat Board existed prior to World War II, but it became mandatory buyer of our grain for export in the War Measures Act of World War II. And for the prices were locked in for the Allies. And when the war ended, those low prices were still below world market value, available to the Saskatchewan farmer for years after World War II. And here, Jason, you're back here. You can finish.
Well, just on that, I mean, the tools are available to us now technologically. And what we've got to be cognizant of is that these need to be moved on provincially. We need Premier Smith and Premier Moe to step in and say, these are our farm value. It's our farm positions, and these are our properties, because the way that we're going to have trade into the future is going to be mediated by these data rails. People aren't thinking in these terms or even in this language, but that is going to be everything. It's not like the Canadian Wheat Board is going to come back in the event that the Strait of Taiwan goes hot. It will be through tariffs and traceability and all of these different pieces, and we need to be ahead of that curve as producers to determining what those are and make the government react to it, not behind the eight ball, always waiting. I think we've seen some of this in animal husbandry just as of late, and everything proposed looks like it'll be disastrously burdensome on the producers themselves. We need to own that and be ahead of it, Trent.
How do we own it, Jason? How is that ownership enforceable? I assume you're talking blockchains, the data on the blockchain. How is it enforced?
Well, it's enforced. I think we're going to see some regulation come out. As an example, I believe that there's going to be agricultural carbon credit legislation, possibly across the prairies, because there's a market for this. This is just, Gerry Ritz has been involved with this for a lot of years, understanding that our no-till practices, a third of the plant is under the ground. Professor Stuart Smith from University of Saskatchewan has proven this. If you want a science-based data, there it is, right? You produce a ton of canola on a black soil zone, and you've got a ton of carbon that's been sequestered in that year. Well, that has commercial value now. If we left it up to the federal government, they'll actually try to exclude that. It's beyond nonsense. So we need to be, again, having a look at data sovereignty, and data sovereignty is not at the Canadian level. It will be as well. And, Christian was mentioning the need for AI centers. If we don't do this, that's going to be imposed upon us by China or some other group, right? So we absolutely need this for the ag space. And, this is going to aid us in our supply chain issues. What happens if we have a conflict? Basically 100% of our chemical compounds coming in, are being derived from two countries, from China and India. And if we get a disruption to that, right, in March, how do we put a crop in with no Roundup? And how long will it take us to secure this? What are we doing? And to Christian's point on strategic reserves, right? And why are we not having strategic reserves potentially for our end use customers? We're doing deals in Japan as we speak. They don't have storage available to them. This is mountain is heavy. Same with Taiwan, same with Korea. So why aren't we storing this for them? These are things that the government could be aligned with. And but trusting Ottawa to do this is a fool's errand. We need to be taking control of this at our provincial level under the auspices of property and never going backwards from a monopoly of the CWD.
When you talk about data collection and how not to do it, the old school, out of date data collection that is called the agricultural census is out there right now. And if anybody's taken a look at that, there's all kinds of information they're demanding from the agricultural producers that doesn't serve anybody but those marketing to the agricultural producers. We did away with it for a number of years because it served no purpose whatsoever. If Monsanto wants data, they can get out there and do their own polling. But at the end of I remember one ADM was so excited that we were doing away with that. He was against it. He went up and down one side of me and he said, I'll tell you how important it is. We have just gotten one census package back from a farmer in your area, and he has 12,000 sheep. And I said, there's no sheep in my riding other than a few pets. And he said, this is so-and-so from Cutknife, Saskatchewan, and he has 12,000 sheep. I said, he's a joker. He doesn't even have a cow. This is how impressive your data collection is, folks. So, and they brought it back, and they're going out there, and it's more intrusive than ever. I had a former constituent. I had a couple of beer with him the other night. We went through his census, and it's just ridiculous. So
it's interesting that he picks sheep.
Yeah. No, he doesn't have any sheep.
Yeah.
The irony is that most of this data is now better, faster, and cheaper, not having government collect it and artificial intelligence to collate that data, and a way that is much less intrusive in terms of your privacy. So challenge also with government is it will never be on the cutting edge of how we might actually make policy, how we might collect data, and how we analyze data. And certainly anytime government collects data, there's people who benefit from it. Part of them are Sylvain and my colleagues who like the fact that they could get basically data for free from Statistics Canada that work really well for their research, but where we might ask ourselves, is this really data that's broadly relevant to sort of better societal outcomes that we're actually looking for? And is this data that we might be able to collect and analyze better effectively in other ways? And artificial intelligence presents us with hosts of opportunities here. And I'm worried that as Canada, as an industry, and as a government, we're missing the boat because once again, we, as Jason pointed out, we're dithering, and as the country that we are, we're going to draft behind everyone else. The problem is in the data-driven 21st century world, when you draft behind others, you lose control. And that's, I think, what the last 25 years have taught us in terms of our reliability on U.S. tech giants.
And any cowboy will tell you the worst place to draft is behind a cow.
Yeah. And Trent, to Christian's point, one of the things that comes out with these massive data collections is data lakes. And data lakes, exactly what the Klarenbach report does on technical trading, et cetera, who owns that data? I would argue it's the farmer owns that data. And as these revelations come out of data lakes, which are completely invisible before you have this, how is that commercialized and who owns that commercialization process? And what we're seeing in, things like the GrainX protocol that GRNX is involved with is that the farmers are going to have the voting notes. They're going to control how their data is used. And we deserve to be paid for that, just like we deserve to be paid, for our product. But our product is not just a kernel of durum wheat. It's when was it seeded? What was it sprayed with? How was it? All of these pieces. And there are premiums for that globally.
So one of the challenges I have is, and I had this experience with different softwares that I've used, early adopter of different messaging apps, your security will never be commercialized. It's your data will never be commercialized. Your messages are private. The messaging app sells to another public company, and all of a sudden there's a change in the licensing agreement, and now your data is not mine anymore. It's Facebook's, for example.
And that's why the geofencing of where is the data being housed, that matters. So, we're getting another data center. I'm a former information technology critic for the province. We've had data centers in Saskatchewan forever. We should have a whole bunch more. They should be in, a little better negotiated terms. We should be using SaskTel for this, and Sask Power and Sask Energy, so that it's not affecting power rates and this sort of thing. But people need to understand, as soon as these announcements have been coming out, the Communist Party of China has been putting out disinformation about that to leave us behind. And we don't think about this as being central to our farms. This is the marketing freedom of the next 30 years and how we own and commercialize our data. So, I'm hoping that farmers will, investigate into this and talk amongst themselves. They're going to solve their own problems. That's our goal.
There's a nuance there also, I think, Jason, so that one of the challenges with data is that, of course, much of it is held on proprietary platforms. So the advantage of making sure, for instance, Canadian farmers are able to generate their own applications and their own platform, that data is not trapped into a proprietary platform that is owned by a foreign corporation, necessarily owns and controls your data, because you can transfer that data since it is held on a proprietary platform. So think from the beginning, where and how do we want that data to be held? To make sure that we retain sovereign control and that the user retains control over that data. And the puzzling thing, I'm sure Gerry lots of things to say about this, but of course, our Privacy Act works on all sorts of aspects of privacy that are completely irrelevant for the 21st century, but we're not actually worrying about the data aspects of privacy in terms of how our data is stored and who controls our data that actually are the 21st century.
Well, that's because they haven't realized the value of that data.
Sylvain? You...
No, well, I've been listening to you. This is a great conversation. I do, because I'm a supply chains guy, so I don't just look at farmers. I also look at processing and distribution and retail. And I actually think that discussions around data ownership, data control is actually much more mature at Farmgate, I would say, right now. When you look at processing, distribution, and retail, they privatize this whole discussion, not just the data, but they actually privatize discussions around data ownership, and there's not a whole lot of sharing. And this is something that I think will need to change, as far as I'm concerned. And I think we've actually seen the food industry's inability to tackle strategically major issues. We're starting to see trade groups work together and competitors work together, because we're facing similar challenges like climate change, like currency wars, geopolitics, and it's getting a lot of people together. But to actually get people to think strategic about data ownership, I don't see a whole lot of that. Cybersecurity is another issue that we're seeing farmers, we're seeing many companies being attacked. In fact, actually yesterday I was visiting a poultry plant right here in the valley in Nova Scotia. And we did talk about cybersecurity, and you can tell that they thought about it, but they're not prioritizing it, and they're not necessarily seeing this as a collective systemic issue. To Jason's point, I think Jason's language is very much about a systems issue and a systems challenge. That's not what I'm hearing across the supply chain.
Interesting.
Mhm.
We have 5 minutes, and our hour will be at the hour. Christian, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Need to, I think, as Canadians, be a little bit less navel gazing, and we've got sort of this ostrich approach to the world, right? We put our head in the sand, and these are all other people's problems. And we need to realize that in the 21st century, what happens in the Strait of Hormuz, what happens in Ukraine, what happens in Sudan doesn't stay there. It all has broad reverberations. I mean, we can see the disruption between Ukraine and the Strait of Hormuz, the disruption that has caused to the global food system, to global food prices, and that disruption, of course, unevenly distributed, and that the people who are the most vulnerable in the world are the most subject to the disruptions that we're seeing. And the role that Canada can play with some sensible policies, some sensible investments, and some good strategic approach to its agricultural business and innovation can drive the opportunities that artificial intelligence, quantum computing will present, some key infrastructure investments. What a difference can make in this extremely volatile world in order to generate the stability and the prosperity that we're looking for and that we're hoping for. And my sense is that perhaps some of the decisions we've made in recent years have not been particularly strategic in that regard. And I think we need to think ahead about what sort of world do we want to live in 5, 10, and 20 years from now. And agriculture, food, and what we do in this country will play a major role in able to shape that world, and whether we want to invest ourselves in that world or we're just going to let the world go the way it has been. And I would say, well, see, look back at the last few years and tell me how well that worked out when Canada's just put its head in the sand and said, these are other people's problems.
Gerry?
Oh, hi. My biggest concern is everything is about marketing. Everything is about telling your version of the story, not about the reality of the story. And we're seeing that twist happening in our media. 90% of them are funded by the federal government. And of course, everything was focused on climate change. And if we didn't take away the lemonade stand from the little girl in the corner, we were all going to fry.
Everything is focused on the climate crisis.
Yeah, exactly.
Not climate change. Climate change is something that has happened for centuries.
Absolutely. It's called weather. And you look at the maps now when the ladies are given the weather forecasts, anything above 24 degrees is a red zone. Hell, that used to just be a nice day in Saskatchewan. I mean, 30 degrees happened, and it was always when we were putting up hay bales. So we've had these things for years, and they did not deter us from producing food. They actually enhance our growing ability because our year gets a little longer, which is good. Up in my country, we're probably 10 days, 2 weeks late getting the seed in the ground. So we're going to need that 10 days, 2 weeks in the fall. And we may get it as our climates has shifted our seasons a little bit. But everything is a crisis. Everything has to be maintained or managed by the governments of the day. And that's wrong. People have gotten lazy. We've gotten complicit. We've gotten lower and lower voter turnouts. We get people crossing the floor and nobody gives a damn. Most people couldn't name their MP, or better yet, a senator that is representing them somewhere. And that's our own fault. We've gotten lazy, we've gotten complicit, and we've allowed this to happen in our democracy. And if we get to the point where we can no longer feed our people, then all of the third world countries we're importing, we become that third world. Why did they come here? At the end of the day, this all has to change in the next short term. A lot of strength and pressure was put on the renewal of NAFTA point, whatever it is now, whatever initials you want to throw at it. And we do have to keep aligning with our strongest trading partners. That's the US. geographically, historically, dollar-wise, it doesn't matter. It's all there. And if North America doesn't begin to form that strong economic unit, then we're going to be overrun by the Chinas and Indias and Brazils of the world. And they don't have the same controls over healthcare and, policing and all these other things that we take for granted now that we're starting to see slip. So, there's a lot more at stake here than just food security, but that's a good beachhead to work out from.
Well, Jason, and then I'll give Sylvain the final remarks here. Jason, final comment?
I just say that, farmers, we need to be aware data security and sovereignty is central. We've heard today that there are discussions about nationalizing grocery stores. After they nationalize a grocery store, then they come after your farm. Do not take this lightly, because with AI, right, the ability to have a robot plant and harvest your crop exists for the first time ever. Thanks, Trent.
Sylvain?
Listen, do you guys know how many marketing boards we have in Canada?
Lots.
Too many. It's 137. Okay. So we spoke about the Canadian Wheat Board, and I'm very thankful for Gerry's leadership in eliminating the monopsony that really was affecting thousands and thousands of farmers. We have a more competitive sector now as a result of ending the monopsony, but we still have this heavy reliance on these power countervailing mechanisms that are bringing more bureaucracy and roadblocks to making Canada a very strong agricultural powerhouse. We're risk averse in Canada. We're always seeking protection until we figure out that it's costing more money. And then we don't know how to respond. And of course, I have to talk about supply management. Supply management is an important policy, but it needs to change. It needs to change. The quota system can remain, but we're supporting sectors that are adamant in not competing, and we can't afford that anymore. So this dependency on these marketing boards is actually holding us back.
Well, this is great. My deepest thanks to Professor Christian Leuprecht, Dr. Sylvain Charlebois, Honorable Gerry Ritz, my old buddy from Etonia, Jason Dearborn. This has been a great, phenomenal discussion. I think the listeners will find it very informative. I'm Trent Klarenbach. It's sunny in Saskatoon. Life's good.